Hello and welcome. I'm going to wait just a few seconds while our audience, our attendees fill into this Zoom room. And as that happens, I'm Beth Spotswood. I'm Alta Journal's digital editor. I'm going to take care of some light housekeeping here at Alta Live. So welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us today at Alta Live. This is the digital interview series we do here at Alta Journal. Hopefully today, if you're in the right place, you're here for a conversation on saving Napa's wine from wildfire. Today, I am so excited to welcome winemakers Priyanka French and Randy Dunn, along with Alta Journal contributor Heather John Fogarty. In the current issue of our magazine, Alta Journal, Heather wrote about the devastating impact of what is now an annual wildfire season on Napa's cabernet makers, particularly as it hits right as wildfire season hits right at harvest time. But there is some hope and some creativity that is emerging from all of this as winemakers navigate this reality. Alta's editor-at-large, Mary Melton, will lead Priyanka, Randy, and Heather in a conversation all about this. Before I give it away to Mary, I do want to just let you know that if you're unfamiliar with Alta Journal, we are an award-winning quarterly magazine and website focused on California and the West. If you like what we do here today, and I so hope that you do, please do check us out at altaonline.com. We've got exciting stuff going on. We do events like this every week. We have a California book club. In fact, that's meeting tomorrow with author Dana Johnson. I'm going to send all of you links to Alta, to the California Book Club, and a link to this video in case you miss any of it later this afternoon. So keep your eyes peeled for that. There is a Q&A button at the bottom below the screen here. Please ask any questions you want in that Q&A button, and we will get to as many of them as we can towards the end of the interview. We're going to go to about 1 p.m. today. Again, this interview will be posted on altaonline.com later today, and I'm going to shoot you an email with all sorts of great links to that and other things. So without further ado, I am very happy to turn it over to Alta Journal's editor-at-large, Mary Melton.
Thank you so much, Beth. Appreciate that. And thank you to Priyanka and Randy and Heather, of course, for being here today. I was so moved by Heather's story about the plight of vintners in Napa, and also really excited and inspired by the stories of what you're doing to rethink the future of farming there. So I just would love, honestly though, like as tough as this is, like I know from my friends in the Bay Area, I'm in LA, but I know I've heard today that the skies are red up there again today, you know, and as we know from the devastation that we're hearing about the Dixie Fire and other fires in the area, how's your mental health? Like how much of a toll has stress taken on you? I just want to do a little mental health check-in with you all up there to see how it's going. Because I imagine stress it's already stressful to be a farmer, no matter what kind of farming you're doing. But I would imagine this extended fire season that we find ourselves in now in California has added a layer to that. So I just wanted to check in with you all and see how you're doing. Priyanka, how's it? How are things?
Things are good. I think just like what you said, when you're in not just winemaking, in the agricultural field in general, there is a big level of humility that's already ingrained in you, because at the end of the day, you know, we are kind of at the mercy of Mother Nature in many ways, and it's our job to, you know, control the things that we do have control over. And I think that's what this conversation is about. But we do have some smoke in the air today. The sun was a little bit more of an orange this morning, but you know, you've got to keep focusing on what's working and what's positive. And right now the smoke is pretty high up in the air. There's no ash on the ground. We actually had patches of blue skies keep breaking in and out. So far, fingers crossed, things are looking good. And you know, I'm excited for that 2021 vintage that's getting ready here in the next few weeks.
Wonderful. Randy, you're a family dynasty there. What's your perspective?
Well, I think years ago, my banker said to me, "Oh my God, I thought other things were risky, but you farmers got to be crazy." So It was pretty red, that sun this morning. And, you wake up in the middle of the night and your throat's kind of dry and raspy because of the smoke. No, the whole thing is nobody really knows what this stuff means. And that's, the bottom line to it. And we just got to plod along and, make some wine and see how it turns out. And hopefully it'll be fine.
Yeah, I think it'd be helpful, Heather, for anyone who maybe hasn't read your story yet, if we can maybe set the scene a little bit before we dig into some of the innovations and ways that you're thinking around this. And of course, Randy and Priyanka, want to hear from you of how has, and I know some things you're waiting to see, but how have the last couple of years affected the health of crops, the impact of these unusually high temperatures that we've been having that may be part of the new normal, a phrase I'm not that fond of, but seems appropriate maybe at the moment. And then maybe talk a little bit about what we're thinking about the effects of smoke. Two things you talk about quite a bit in the story, Heather.
So I'm what's considered a newcomer to Napa. We moved around the corner from Randy in 1985. Growing up, there would be the occasional spot fire, but it was easily contained, and truly in the 80s and 90s, we were much more concerned with flooding. Mm. And then that changed about 10 years ago. And I think almost every year my parents have had to evacuate at least once. And then last year, their house nearly burned down. It was torched on the outside. Neighbors burned to the ground. And it's just, this last year was the first fire season that lasted the duration of harvest. And it got me thinking, because that's never happened before. As our fire season in California in general extends, what does this mean for our agriculture? And, personally to me, wine country.
Yeah. What have been the effects? Like, Priyanka, when you or Randy, when you're out, among the crops, how do you see the effects of this on your crops?
I think, I'll speak for us here at Signorello. So I'm the winemaker at Signorello Estate. We're located on the southern end of Silverado Trail. So kind of a pretty different area compared to the part of the valley that Randy has been farming for years. We, I think, are, experiencing the kind of cyclic effects of a drought more than temperatures. I would say, the vines, especially the ones that have been established for a while, tend to start becoming more self-sustainable. So the temperatures, the effects of high temperature is something that we have a little bit of control over. There are systems you can put in place to help cool the vineyard, for lack of a better term, during those higher temperature day hours specifically. But what you really can't control is the drought. So I would say the reduced yields are probably more an effect due to the drought, and something that Napa has seen happen in cycles almost every decade. I don't think that is something that is a new challenge for us. We see these cycles in terms of tonnages and yields happen every couple of years. But in terms of heat related issues, I think, you are seeing some reduced yields, but grape growers they have quite a few tools at their disposal now to help mitigate some of those effects.
And what about the effects of smoke in particular? Like and it seems like that's a newer concern.
Sure. I can keep speaking.
Yes.
So I think, what Randy said, that we don't really know, is probably the best answer. In many cases, we are trying to know. And that was a huge part of the challenge of 2020 for me was, we had experienced the devastation in 2017, but even before that, we have been around fire and smoke in this Northern California region almost since 2015. There's been some kind of an effect of fire or smoke, or it's been a part of that harvest story for a couple of vintages now. So I think in 2020, we made a very active effort to really understand the effects, and that involved sampling from the first day of the fire to really start to get baseline numbers and understand what this effect of smoke is. What we found that has been extremely encouraging is that, it's not something that is of significant relevance if it's just a few days. It really does have to be a prolonged exposure to smoke for a number of days. And then it's also the quality of smoke that makes a significant impact on the grapes. So, for example, at Signorello on the southern side, we weren't as close to the epicenter of the glass fire or the LNU fire. The whites that we picked in 2020, as well as some of our earlier red lots, are beautiful, and the 2020 whites just went into bottle and they taste fantastic. It's really some of those later lots that we brought in after almost over a month of smoke exposure that are showing certain smoke-related sensory qualities. But whether that is a significant impact in terms of complete wine quality, I think that is a question we're still trying to answer as winemakers.
How are you feeling, Randy, about, you're right on the cusp of harvest season right now. Is that, do I have the timing right? That's usually like end of August, beginning of September?
We're really probably 3 weeks out, I would think.
Okay. And what are you anticipating for this year's harvest?
Well, I think it's maybe a little bit lighter harvest than normal, but as we all know, there are fluctuations up and down that you just got to roll with bunches. And, quite frankly, I think some of those fluctuations serve to maybe more stabilize the market, so to speak. The whole smoke thing, the big problem is that we don't really know what compounds are mainly responsible for the smoke. And until we find that out, you cannot really do an effective treatment, if you will, or design a treatment that only focuses on those compounds. Now they're doing things like charcoal filtration, which, from beginning chemistry, charcoal is used to filter something if you want to remove everything. It's the universal stripper, color, flavor, everything else. So when people have in their product, a charcoal filtration, I just sort of say, yeah, well, right. All that being said, because we only make Cabernet, we're subject to the greatest smoke exposure, if you will, just because of the length of time that the vines are out there, the grapes are out there. And as a result, 2020, we have sold the entire vintage. In fact, it left last week in a tank truck. So it will be a really easy bottling for the 2020 vintage. We'll have a few experimental barrels and maybe some Syrah and a barrel of Petit Syrah and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Heather, we focus a lot in the story on Cabernet in particular, and the effects on it. Do you have thoughts on how did that become the preeminent grape of Napa?
Oh, if you've ever had a bottle of Randy's wine, that speaks for itself. It just, Napa Cabernet, there's nothing like it. It's hometown pride, but it really is exceptional. And it's the grape that, in my opinion, is the best expressed from the region, the soils, and it's just so fascinating because if you taste up and down the valley where Priyanka is versus Oakville, Rutherford, or Howell Mountain, the differences, there's so much personality in the wines, and there's a reason why they're world renowned and why they're, the king of the region. Sure, there are other grapes that grow well there, but there's a reason why they don't command the same prices. Cabernet is just king.
I mean, as you say in the story, half as many, I think, cab grapes were crushed in 2020 as in 2019. Like, as you look forward, Priyanka and Randy, like, do you think how do you see the numbers developing in the coming years? And that's great news, I think, Randy, right? That the 2020 sold out.
Yeah, 2020 sold out, all right.
Yeah.
The expensive way in a tank truck. Cabernet will still hang around. I think that it's certainly not going to happen in my lifetime that people are going to say, "Oh, we got to grow something that is more suited for hotter climates." It's a big switch to make, and Cabernets and vines in general are really pretty hardy, pretty tough. They're a darn weed from anywhere. And provided, you need water, there's no doubt about that. And fortunately here where we are, our wells are still in good shape, but that is not the case everywhere.
Yeah, if the quantity does go down, like, Priyanka, do you see more blends maybe coming onto the market, or fewer cases of the single varietals? How do you see that panning out?
I agree with Randy. I haven't lost hope on Cabernet, and I don't think many in Napa have. I think we all understand that these kind of issues are cyclical in nature, and there are things that we can do to help prevent it. But the legacy of Cabernet in Napa, and in a good vintage, just the extraordinary expression that winemakers across the valley managed to bring forward of this grape, I think that is here to continue for a while. There are certain things that we are doing in the vineyard to help keep Cabernet in place. I think with us being on the southern end, we are a little bit cooler in terms of climate. So we're exploring, maybe even, we will do some experimental picks earlier on just to see if we can achieve ripening faster or in a way that doesn't require us to have our grapes on the vine for as long as possible, for as long as it's usually needed. We've also been experimenting with yields, with shade cloth, with different kinds of canopy management, just to see how we can farm in a way that would help us bring the fruit in, in time. In a regular vintage, of course, a year like 2020 and 21, we're also seeing a few effects exaggerated because of the existing drought conditions. But in a usual vintage, the fire season is at a point that most of the fruit could possibly be in the winery at that point. So I think there is still hope the next few years, especially as we study these 2020, 2017 wines even more, and see what the ageability was and how they kind of changed just with a little more age in the bottle and things of that sort. I think we'll learn a lot more, but what Cabernet does and how it responds to what Napa has to offer is spectacular, and I'm excited to keep continuing that tradition.
Yeah, I think I saw that there's 500 wineries in Napa, is the number I saw, and that 95% of them are family owned, which knocked me over. Like, I would have thought that was a much smaller number. So I am curious, Heather and Randy, about the community of Napa, like how they've come together to band together. And I'm curious, and obviously with you as well, Priyanka, like, are there instances where there's a shared sense of knowledge about this, shared experimentation, like this communal feel of like, we're all in this together? Are you sharing best practices with each other? Did you see instances of that, Heather, when you were reporting the story?
Well, I'm going to turn this over to Randy. I mean, that's just a hallmark of agriculture in general. Like, if your piece of equipment goes out, you call your neighbor. And I mean, that's just how the valley operates. So I would want to hear from Randy and Priyanka on that.
Yeah.
It's obviously a it's a small valley, but there's a large number of wineries around. And so you can kind of pick and choose who your friends are, so to speak, and share the knowledge and the equipment. Years ago, there was a tremendous amount of that going on. Before we get too far away from something that was said earlier, I think that maybe the good thing about, and it's sort of a warped view to have this, I guess, the good thing about this smoke stuff is that maybe this will get winemakers to, in fact, pick their grapes with less hang time, less raisoning, and less high alcohol wines. And that, I think, would be a very beneficial outcome, but that's just my own bias, as you all know, probably.
I'd love to talk a little bit about the community here in Napa, because in the 17 fires, Signorello suffered quite a bit of devastation. We lost all of the structural aspects of the estate, and it was this community of vintners that, was just an incredible support system for us. Ray Signorello tells me stories of how he was contacted by so many people that he's known in this industry for decades that offered office space or warehouse space for wines, or even, labs, or an ability to crush or bring fruit or any barrels to him. So I think that spirit of camaraderie does exist. There's quite a few technical organizations that have come together, and we're starting to see a ton of collaboration happen between universities and research organizations here, not just in California, but in the United States, because wine regions in Oregon and Washington are also facing similar issues like we are in California, and we're seeing a ton of collaboration happen with Australia and New Zealand and other areas that have also seen wildfires affect their harvests in previous vintages. I think at the end of it, what the Napa Valley Vintners are doing currently, hopefully we'll also see some tremendous results. They're putting in a lot of efforts and generous contributions towards firefighting and fire prevention measures when it comes to clearing roads, education for vintners to understand how to protect their properties in a smoke event, or how to correctly test your grapes. And a lot of this education is being kind of passed around, and a lot of that comes from collaboration. I mean, in 2020, I went to one of our friends at Crocker and Star and did a trial on 1/2 ton of grapes there, and then went to Quintessa with another 1/2 ton. And I think that exchange is still very much happening, and it's what's carried Napa through previous years, and it'll continue. I think it'll continue to be the strength of the valley moving forward too.
When you built back your structures there, Priyanka, did you build them back with anything different in mind? Like, were there in terms of how you approached the construction?
Well, we're currently building.
Okay.
So we're in the process. We just finally got our final permits from the county, so we're in the process of starting. But when we sat down with our architects and our design team, one of Ray's first words were, "I cannot deal with another fire," at least from a structural damage point of view. And so, of course, one of the first things was just materials. So everything that we're using for the rebuild is non-flammable, or hopefully, not a source for a fire. So it's all concrete, glass, and stainless steel. We're also building with double seal doors, so that in case of a smoke event, we're able to isolate at least the cellar and the wine aging portion of the fermentation building completely separate. We also have specialized air vents that are being installed. There is a pretty robust fire suppression system that will also be a part of this new build, and that includes sprinklers on the roof, as well as sprinklers that can spray out, a certain radius even beyond just the physical structures to keep things wet and keep things protected during a fire. And then, of course, we will have fire storage tanks. So any new construction in Napa is now required to have a certain amount of water that they hold on site as a fire prevention strategy. And we'll be fully equipped for a fire truck to come in and hook up to that, even if the water is needed elsewhere and not here at Signorello. So yeah, a lot of thought being put into make sure this does not happen again.
Yeah, no, that sounds really, really innovative. Well, before we have Beth come in with the Q&A in a minute, Randy, I'm curious as a multi-generational family winemaker and real activist in this. You know, you were so hands-on with the land. Have the last few years changed at all your relationship with the land and your crops? Like, do you look at things in a different way, or is it still what it was like when you were first going out there?
Oh, it's pretty much the same old stuff. I think that the thing that's most changed is how we're dealing with the hillside underbrush. You know, we're doing a lot of brush removal, as well as pumps here and pumps there and tanks and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And Heather, has the valley, you know, as someone who grew up there, has the valley changed a lot to you? Like when you do go up and visit, like, I imagine it's a different, if you were a 10-year-old growing up there now, it might be a different experience than 10-year-old Heather experienced growing up there, but maybe not.
Yes and no.
Okay.
You know, the 90s saw a real influx of, you know, .com money coming in, and definitely the flavor of that changed the neighborhood. But, you know, I still have a ton of friends up there, and their kids are all still doing Carpy Gang, Little League in St. Helena. And there's a lot that stays the same. And the very best of it, I think you probably would have a very similar experience. But, you know, it's when I grew up, there was a vegetarian baked potato bar with a accordion player on Main Street. I don't see that happening now.
Maybe it'll make a comeback. Yeah. Great. Well, Beth, you want to join us? I know you're gathering our Q&As.
Indeed, I am. Hi.
Our
Or Q's. I don't have the
Yes,
A's.
yes, you know the
That's
A's.
what you guys are here
A's.
for. Jessica asks, question for the winemakers. Do you think that fires and smoky conditions will encourage winemakers to move towards making wine more naturally and organically? Will it have the opposite effect or no impact at all? Priyanka.
I was really hoping you'd give Randy that question.
Well, yeah, Randy said he has strong
No.
opinions about these things. So yeah, I
I hope that it encourages them
I don't-
to go more natural. Randy, tell us your thoughts.
Well, I don't think it will. I mean, you're either going to go that direction, but I don't know why the smoke and that sort of thing should push you then in that direction.
Are you seeing more of a shift in that direction, Randy, in general up there?
Oh, you know, there's the biodynamic version that's still around, but not very much. I don't think, you know, people are a little bit more conscious of some of the herbicides in particular that have been used. You know, for example, we're not using Roundup. I haven't used Roundup for, I don't know, 3 years now, I think. I think there's an awareness on that level, but to go, you know, full bore straight organic is pretty tough.
And I'm just curious, Randy, you had mentioned before what you would see as a positive of taking the grapes off the vine a little bit earlier and then having a lower alcohol content. Is that something that you do hear from customers? Like, is this something that comes up? Because you know, Heather, as you were talking about the preeminence of cabs, like the first thing I always think of is they're so big, right? Like cabs are just a big wine. So are you hearing that from customers?
Well, what I hear from customers is a little bit myopic, if you will, in that our customers like our wines largely because they're not huge in alcohol. They're all under 14% with an exception or two. And that's, I think, our following. And as I say, I certainly hope that it's a spin-off from the smoke business, because then we can really have some wines that truly reflect the regions. Way back in the 80s, it was very easy to tell the difference between a wine from Spring Mountain or Rutherford or Oakville or wherever, Hell Mountain. Now it's really hard. I know people that claim they can tell the difference, but it's not nearly as easy as it used to be. And basically, when grapes get overripe, they all start to taste like raisins. And that's the problem, I think, that I think should be addressed. But as I've said before, I'm maybe alone in my boat, so to speak.
All right, next question. Kathy asks, thoughts on the concept of dry farm? I don't even know what dry farm is.
Dry
farming. Oh,
Randy.
Well, dry farming is just when you don't water your grapes. That's dry farming. And, in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, it was dry farming. It's very difficult to dry farm in the hills, primarily because it's hard to get vines to grow from a little tiny plant with no water. Down on the valley floor is a whole different ballgame. There's water there, and you can dry farm a lot easier than you can in the hills. But establishing a vineyard with dry farming is really difficult up in the hills.
Does this increased, Lisa asks, does this increased collaboration between far away grape growing regions mean competition between Napa and Sonoma wineries is over? Heather is doing the big no.
No, yeah, get in there, Heather.
There's no competition. They're very different wines. And I feel like the competition is not, I don't think that from Napa I see a competition. Sonoma makes beautiful wines, but they're not Napa Cabernet. It's kind of like I moved down to LA, and the whole LA San Francisco thing. LA doesn't have that competition with San Francisco. It doesn't worry about it.
Oh boy, so Sonoma is the NorCal of wine country.
I don't know.
Heather John Fogarty. Priyanka.
I think we used to have this conversation quite a bit previously, and even when Napa was up and coming as a region, they were always trying to draw these parallels to Napa and Bordeaux. And people have done that over the years in regions within the US. And I think we're finally at a point where we're realizing how to appreciate individuality and the fact that all of these areas and regions have very different strengths and unique selling points, and they're working hard on achieving excellence in all of those. So I've never looked at Sonoma as competition. I actually quite enjoy going to Sonoma. The wines there, are great. The focus is a little different. They're experimenting a lot more, and you're starting to see that happen in Napa as well. And so, I would hope that there isn't any competition, but there's definitely a lot of collaboration between the two regions that maybe a lot of people don't hear about, but it exists.
Last question we have time for. And again, folks, if you missed any part of this, we will send you a recording of this video. Vishal asks, are there varietals that do better in the smoke? Do we see movement towards a different mix of grapes grown in the future? Randy.
Well, I think the obvious answer to that is that the varietals that ripen really early. And this is it's avoiding the smoke. I don't think we know that any variety will withstand smoke exposure better or not. But those that you pick really early. Pinot, for example, get them off the vine before we get a bunch of smoke on them. I don't know.
Priyanka, dive in. Then there's one more question that I think is a great question we can end with. Go ahead, Priyanka.
Sure. I think there is a difference in certain varieties. As Randy said, there is still a lot to get confirmed in terms of what the compounds are that are truly affecting wine, or that we're associating with what we call the smoke taint. But for some of those compounds that have been discovered, it's also been found that they exist in, for example, a toasted barrel that's being used for aging wine as well. And so that has also been a huge discovery for a lot of winemakers, because sometimes what we are perceiving as maybe a smoke-related issue could also be a part of a regular vintage that saw a higher percentage of new oak being used. So these are, questions that we're starting to ask ourselves, is maybe if there is a smoke-tainted wine, maybe, we manipulate or we change the aging program on it, and that way we can help integrate these new compounds in a different way. On the other hand, there are some varietals that come in naturally with higher levels of the specific compound of glycol. So Syrah, for example, always does have a presence of glycol that Cabernet Sauvignon will never have unless it's exposed specifically to smoke. So there is a difference between varieties. There is a difference between even clones within the same variety. But I think what Randy said ultimately is, if you have a grape variety that ripens quickly, or you have a vineyard located at a point where you are starting to do that pick, or you are realizing that you don't need to wait up until the end of September or October, and that the ripening profile can be matched with your wine style at an earlier pick, though that's obviously the best decision, because you're literally avoiding the smoke.
Last question from Bob, which I think is a really important kind of big picture question. Bob loves Cabernet and Zinfandel and Napa Valley, but also he loves nature. Might the climate change driven fires be a sign that it is time to stop replacing California's natural flora and fauna with vineyards?
The time is way past. We should have curtailed vineyard development a long time ago, but the Board of Supervisors in Napa County won't do that.
So is it too late?
No, it's never too late. But we shouldn't allow any more vineyards to be planted, any more hills to be cleared, any more trees to be cut. Period.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, dropping the mic on that. Folks, I wanted to thank you before you hit the road. Next week, we are going to kind of take a twist on the Alta Live, certainly from this topic, and we're going to meet with Boys in the Hood producer Steve Nicolaides, along with Alta contributor Tim Grieving, and we're going to talk about 3 really amazing 1991 movies set in LA: Terminator 2, Boys in the Hood, and Grand Canyon, and how they're kind of incredible predictive qualities around policing, race, and kind of really set the scene for LA in 1991. So please do join us for that. We'll send you an invite. We also have, we're welcoming Dana Johnson at the California Book Club tomorrow night. We'll send you a link to that.
Great
and
book.
Most importantly, so grateful to Priyanka French from Signorello Winery, Randy Dunn of Dunn Family Vineyards, Heather John Fogarty, Alta contributor, and my beautiful colleague, Mary Melton, Alta's editor-at-large. Thank you guys so much for joining us and offering this wisdom.
Thank you.
We're really, really grateful.
Thank you.
And thanks to everyone for tuning in. Please do stay safe and support these wonderful wineries. Take care.
So grateful for your wines.
Thanks.
Thank you.